Hello and welcome to Firearm Freedom. This is going to be another First Impressions video. In today's First Impressions video, we are taking a look at the Girsan P35 Ops. And before we get this video started, as always, there are a few different options for supporting me here on YouTube. You can head down to that description, check out the links that help support me, either by bringing you to a website with a discount code that gives me a kickback, or checking out the Firearm Freedom merchandise store. And at the very least, you guys can help out by commenting below this video. That shows the algorithms that you want to see this content, and hopefully it won't be hidden from your subscription feed. The Girsan high power clone. I have posted a few teasers about this pistol on my Instagram and other Firearm Freedom social media accounts, and you guys are super excited about it. And I was pretty pumped up about this pistol. I had seen a few of the Girsan high power clones in and out of the gun shop that I work in a few different variations. They actually do make probably at this point either 6 or even 10 variations of the MC35, from basic bare bones to match variations, and then also the Ops variation that you see here. The high power has kind of gotten this revived desire in the community throughout the past year or so, maybe about a year and a half, 2 years. And it's really cool to see. I've always been a huge fan of high powers, and I remember seeing the very late Browning high powers right before they discontinued them for the final time come into the previous gun shop that I work at, and I was always kind of like hemming and hawing about them, thinking about picking one up, and they looked okay. The triggers were always horrendous, and the price point at that time was just a little bit out of reach. Now, little did I know that that model was going to be discontinued, and ultimately all of the high powers from that point forward were just completely out of a price point that I was willing to pay. And with that being said, I finally started to see EAA start to import in the Girsan high power. Now, they started to do these high powers in just the base P35. And the P35 was essentially just a bare bones high power clone, and it was an identical copy. So everything was the same. It was slightly upgraded in the way of it getting rid of the magazine disconnect safety and just a few other things, but it was essentially an exact clone, and you can actually switch out parts. They were completely compatible with original high power parts, which I think is a huge win. And of course, with any Turkish-made clone, it's going to come in at a ridiculously good price point, as the P35 did. Now, EAA has kind of continuously been importing different Girsan models of the P35 and expanding on the line, and that's when I saw the Ops flow into the gun shop that I work at. This is actually the second Ops that we got in, and really the difference here is you have an extended beaver tail, and if you know old high powers, you'll know that that is very extended compared to the original high power beaver tail, and that's really nice because a lot of the time when you are looking at high powers, that hammer bite is real, and if you had any sort of meaty hands, it's really easy to get up and over that beaver tail, and the hammer would push back, especially just the standard hammer and not the little spurred hammer that you see here, and it would pinch the living crap out of you. So it is really nice to have that extended beaver tail. This particular model also includes the Picatinny rail, which I thought just was a really nice upgrade. It has G10 grips, and it does have their kind of annoying logo really big on the grips right here. I really could do without that, and I did want to add some goon tape just for, you know, my love of the goon tape, but also to give me some traction and finally to cover up the logo on the grips. I just hated the look of it on there. So of course, a little bit of goon tape covers it up, no problem. It also has a flat-faced trigger, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Actually, we'll talk about a few things about this gun. You have a traditional external extractor, as you would see on any other high power, and then for the most part, all internals basic high power. It's going to take a high power barrel, high power magazines, and all of that good stuff. Now, this pistol comes in, I want to say, at around like $550-ish right now, but that price has been kind of going up a little bit with the new year. They increased the price slightly, but you're not paying over, I'd say, $625 for this gun. Now, I know that's an incredibly reasonable price, but I will say my first gripe about the P35 is that it only comes with one magazine in the box. Now, I would totally understand if it was like a Shadow Systems or something else like a Glock magazine. Almost everyone out there is probably going to have other Glock magazines. But if you're like me, I did not have any other high power magazines just laying around my house. So just coming with one magazine kind of sucks. You're not, just right out of the gate, you can't even do a reload at the range, your first range day, if you don't buy additional magazines. Now, luckily, these Metgar mags, which is who makes the magazines for the Girsan here, they are pretty available and also very, very cheap. I think retail, they're like 24 bucks for these magazines. But it was still just kind of annoying because I wanted to take it right to the range, and then I just was like, oh man, it only comes with one mag, so I gotta go order those. They're not available in any shop around me, so now I gotta wait like, 4 or 5 days to get some extra magazines to just bring this to the range. So I would really love to see Girsan in the future throw in at least one additional magazine to give you two. These things are super affordable, so it just kind of is confusing to me as to why it would be an issue to include multiple magazines. But regardless, that's kind of the first of a few gripes that I'm going to have about this Girsan. In the case, I loved everything about the way that this gun felt. It felt fast. I mean, just everything about it. The way that I was doing reloads, the way that I presented the gun, the way that everything was just meshing into place, it felt good. The way that the sights came up, the trigger was okay. I will say right out of the gate that high power triggers suck. And it was interesting because we got a few different models of the P35 in. One had a horrible trigger. It was very, very bad. This one is not as bad. So it seems like that's kind of like up in the air depending on which model specifically you get. You may have a better or worse trigger. This one is not too bad. But I also want to state that I'm going to tell you guys some issues that I had with the fit and finish, to say the very least, about the gun here as we continue on in the review. And I have to say how I got this, because that may actually be the culprit for some things. So Girsan did not send this to me. I paid for this at the gun shop that I work at, and we got this in, and when I was deciding on buying it, it was already in our case. It was out for sale, good to go, and one of my other guys that works at the shop actually went to look at the bore just to see what type of rifling the barrel had, what rifling they went with, and he noticed rust inside of the barrel, and it wasn't just a little bit of rust. We shined the flashlight down and it was completely rust all the way through. Now, it was surface rust, and it was seeming like the inside of the barrel was not coated as the outside of the barrel was. I don't know if they just polished this, if they chrome this or something, but whatever they do, it seemed that the inside of the barrel was unfinished. So of course, we did not want to sell this just to any of our customers at that point, because that kind of sucks. You're buying a new gun, there's rust in the barrel. Yes, it could probably be cleaned out, but it shouldn't have rust in the barrel right from the manufacturer. And of course, if it is unfinished, that is only going to kind of get worse over time. So we went ahead, we called our reps that we deal with, and they let us know that, hey, you can keep that at a significant discount, or you can send it back to us, we'll send you a replacement. So at that point, I was kind of already deciding on it, and I was asked, hey, we can keep it at a discount if you want to get it, at a slightly reduced price because of the barrel. And I said, you know what, sure, let's do it. So this, for all intents and purposes, would be how you would receive a P35 out of the case. It's not marked as a blem from Girsan or anything like that. This is what you would have gotten. I say that about the barrel because I don't know if this was just kind of a little bit of a lemon that left the factory without proper QC. I was able to scrub the crap out of that barrel, use a brush, really good CLP, which was Seal 1, of course, and it actually cleaned up pretty good. I could not see immediate rust. When I got it to the range, of course, you guys are going to be watching this a few days after this video is filmed. It was brutally cold. It's March here in Pennsylvania, and it's just really weird because it'll be 60 degrees one day, and then today, for the range day, it was about 15 degrees with the wind chill, and it was just brutally cold. I had 3 layers of gloves on, and my fingers were still frozen, so it was really not the best day to be testing anything, let alone a handgun, because you just can't feel much. Now, on the other side of that coin, it is also a really good day to figure out how something is going to perform in adverse conditions. I had a lot of thoughts in my mind about potentially using this gun as a defensive gun. It felt that good to me. It was really that good. Other than holsters being a problem, I was very interested in that. And as we started shooting, that's when kind of the external fit and finish of the gun became an issue. It had 0 malfunctions throughout the day. The gun ran 100%. We ran it with full metal jacket, about 200 rounds, and then I also ran it with some Sierra hollow points, all 20 rounds of these hollow points fed. No problems whatsoever, just standard 115 grain. So the gun itself did not have a malfunction and really, of course, shot reliably. My first issue that I had with the external fit and finish was, of course, the fiber optic popping out. Now, this is usually what's going to happen, and especially if the range day is very, very hot or very, very cold, you can expect these fiber optics to just pop out. But this popped out round count, probably number like 8, I think. It was like not even 2 magazines and this popped out. So that, you know, that kind of sucks. I was able to keep it. I found it on the ground, and if you're not familiar with fiber optics, it's really not the end of the world if it falls out. You heat it up and push it back in. But again, you know, it should have been in there a little bit better. It shouldn't fall out in a mag and a half. Yes, it was very cold out, but I mean, you know, it is what it is. I was able to continue the range day just with that bare front sight, and it's not ideal, but it worked fine. The other immediate issue that I felt before I shot the gun, after I had purchased it from the shop and actually last night as I was getting it ready to go to the range, I noticed that the rear sight was doing this number. Now, you guys can see, I mean, that's a lot of movement. That's a lot of movement side to side. Now, I could be missing something, but this screw up here at the top is to adjust your elevation. And there are no other additional screws that I am seeing in order to get this thing to stay tight. Now again, I could completely be missing something. Maybe I'm just not turning this screw far enough, and that is the screw to adjust it. I should probably read the manual just to be 100% sure, but to me, this seems like this is just dovetailed into place, and it's got a loose dovetail. I mean, if it is this screw up at the top, even then, it should not be this loose to move side to side. That is way too much movement to have on a dovetail rear sight. And I think a lot of the accuracy issues we were having with this gun throughout the day was probably me and the gloves and this trigger, because as the trigger sits, I'm actually not a huge fan. I'm not as much of a fan as I thought I would be. But I did notice some very interesting left to right stringing. And for me, that's a little bit bizarre when it comes to accuracy testing on pistols. And I mean, it was really, really difficult to connect with this gun. And I am by no means an expert marksman or anything like that with a pistol, but usually I can at least hit the target. And when we were using just the standard A-zone in the center of the IPSC target and moving out in our usual 5-yard increments for accuracy testing, I was able to keep them all relatively in the A-zone, but I mean, you're noticing a pretty interesting left to right stringing. And that was either me pulling the trigger one way or another, which probably was the case because of the gloves, or also what I think was contributing to it was the rear sight shifting left to right, because later in the day I freaking saw it moving left to right. I mean, every single round, and pop, 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 it was just moving side to side. So of course that is going to cause some issues. And then as I removed the gloves to see if that would help out, I only had one outer layer of the mechanics gloves. We went for the head on the IPSC target in the A zone, and I was connecting, but then when we moved out to our usual 30 yards, give or take, with handguns, which I can connect with everything else at that distance, I got one hit out of 5, which is just horrendous at 30 yards. So again, I think I was stringing left to right, same deal with that rear sight. So that was the other bit of QC that was very frustrating out of box. And then finally, I actually left this so you guys could see it, the roll pin. So that roll pin there, which by the way, if you take a little flathead or something like that, it just pushes slowly back into place, which means it is very much undersized, is just slowly popping up throughout the range day. It popped up to about there, and then the FF Pocket Gunsmith just pushed it back into place, and within about 3 magazines, it slowly started working its way back up, and that is how you see it there. So that is frustrating to say the least. That should not be popping up like that. You got to use the right roll pin, and that's just a little bit frustrating. And now we can get into how the gun shot. I think in a perfect condition range day, right, or at an indoor range, this gun is going to shoot incredibly well. I mean, the trigger is going to do a very good job, I think. And when I was really having, the wind wasn't killing me and I did not have gloves on, I mean, I was putting it just one hole in the other. It was really a seriously accurate pistol. But I think it just, especially if you got gloves on, this trigger is brutal. It is so narrow, right? And the problem with that is that if you have any sort of gloves on, you lose feeling of the trigger entirely. And it's very easy to just slightly, I mean, right there, you got, right as I start to pull, if you just do this a little bit, you're actually pulling on the right side of the trigger. If you do this a little bit, you're pulling on the left side of the trigger. You have to have just an absolutely perfect pull on that trigger, or you're going to pull it left or right. Now, again, you could argue, hey man, you got to be pulling the trigger right regardless. I get that, but I mean, usually you got a little bit of room for error. On this, you don't. I mean, it is like you got to be right on the money or you're going to have an issue. And if you're right on the money, it's great, but it's really easy to be off, especially if you got 2 layers of gloves on and it's 15 degrees outside. It is a condition that usually not a lot of people are shooting in, but honestly, I like to know those data points to kind of know, okay, where is this gun going to be an issue? And it seems like with glove shooting, it's almost a no-go. Now, as far as the trigger pull, it's better than a regular high-power trigger. I'll give you guys the trigger pull there. You got a little bit of take-up. It is clean. There's not a lot of spongy take-up. And then you hit a very distinct wall, and you got your break. The break is crisp. It's not bad. Now, here's the problem. The reset. Now, you can hear it, right? I could not hear it at the range, and you also cannot feel it at the range if you have gloves on. And even without gloves, it is almost impossible to feel that reset. So what starts to happen whenever you can't feel the reset is you also can't really feel the wall, and the wall is a little bit tough to get to on this, and you end up kind of slapping the trigger a little bit. And if you mix that, right, with that really narrow trigger, you end up really kind of pulling this thing all over the place. Now, when you get it right, it's going good, but, that is a big problem in my opinion. Mix that with the horrendous rear sight and the fiber optic falling out, and, you start running into some problems. What I loved in a stagnant dry fire situation was the slide release, right? The slide release is much larger than a usual high power slide release. It is right where you want it to be. You drop that magazine out, put the new one in, and your thumb just, perfectly lines up. And I was kind of, using that little small piece up here to rest my thumb on, and I found out immediately, actually I'm talking the first round out of the gun, that you can't do that. Even if, I thought, well, hey, that's just the pin. It really shouldn't cause a ton of issues. If anything, it should cause the slide to just not lock to the rear, which is not the end of the world. But actually, it's going to cause the slide to lock open. And what you were getting is this number, where it's just barely touching that. You just had it up enough, and it looked like what was a failure to feed, but it wasn't. just crank that down a little bit and it would fly forward. So ultimately, I just immediately switched to holding my thumb under that, which again, it's not the end of the world, but because this is so obtrusive and out there, it's really easy to run into it. And if you do, it's gonna cause issues with the gun. So that was one of the other things that, again, I wasn't a huge fan of, and it really kind of bummed me out a little bit because my hopes were so freaking high for this gun. It felt so good at the shop, and I was like, man, I would legitimately almost recommend carrying this. It feels so good if it works well. And at the range, I just, I don't know that it really fits that. To me, this is a great range gun. And it is a great gun that if you want to feel the high power, but you want to have just a few upgrades and you don't want to pay high power prices, that's excellent. And as far as the reliability, I got to give it to it. All the SA-35, all these other high power clones kind of suck these days, and they're not reliable guns. They just don't even work that well half the time. So with this, it did work 100%. I can't fault it for reliability. It was very reliable. But all these other little QC things, like these, if Girsan had just taken a little bit of extra time with this pistol and EAA checked it when they imported it or whatever, I would be raving about this gun. I really would be, because if those little small things didn't happen, I could get over the trigger and I could get over the shooting of the gun, because that's me. That's me getting used to this gun, and that's not necessarily the fault of the gun. That's a personal preference. But to add on the roll pin, the rear sight, the fiber optic, it's like how much was missed with this gun for my first impressions of it at the very first range day. I mean, that's just a little sucky. So we are going to put the fiber optic back in. We are going to peen the rear sight in the area, so basically stake it to make sure that it's firm, and I'm also going to read the manual to see if there's some other way that I need to adjust this that I'm missing. And then finally, we're going to get a properly sized roll pin in there so that way it doesn't work its way loose. Then I'm going to wait for it to warm up a little bit outside and go to the range of this pistol without any gloves on to give it a little bit of a second chance. I also do have some wood grips for this that make it look incredible, and I really do like the gun, so I'm kind of just meh about it right now. I'm just a little bit crabby about those small little minor QC issues that I think they could have fixed. That is going to wrap this video up on the P35 Ops. If you guys have any other questions about this pistol or anything else on the channel, please throw them down below in the comment section, and I absolutely will get back to you. While you're down there, head up to the description, check out those links to support the channel, and as always, stay tuned for more great videos coming soon.